ourselves and who we are. I think you all know, I'm Rachel Stuckey, superintendent.
Sherry Reedman, member of the board, graduated from the school district many years ago, as did my children, so yeah.
I'm Mark Brendan, I'm a board member and I have 3 in school, 2 in high school.
Andy Fowl, board chair. I also graduated from the school district, and I have 2 in elementary school.
I'm Irene, and I did not attend any school in Mount Angel. or have, so I did have a grandchild that attended school here for a while in Mount Angel, and so, and then retired.
I'm Teresa, I'm the vice chair. Yeah, I taught for 25 years in the district and all of my children have gone through the school here and graduated, and son teaches here at the moment.
My name's Reed and I'm the student representative at the school.
What year are you at?
I'm gonna be a junior.
I'm Tina Poznanski, and I'm a recruitment coach for student education. I've been in education for 27 years from the K-12 system. I started as a special education teacher, and then I was principal after that for 13 years. So I'm excited to join the student group. I have 2 children, one who is a 20-year-old at the University of Minnesota. I live in Wisconsin. And then a son who will be a senior in high school.
I'm Melissa Matarazzo, and I also have a long history in schools from teacher to principal on the East Coast. I happen to live in New York, and I enjoy coaching tremendously, and we have really enjoyed getting to know Rachel and this community and this organization. So we're spending tomorrow with the administrative team and department leaders. So you're our first taste, and then we have
Nice.
all things tomorrow.
We're in New York.
I live in upstate New York, near the city of Rochester.
Okay.
We call it Western New York.
I
but when I'm on the
understand.
West Coast, I'm like, that sounds silly.
All my education came from New Jersey, that's what it is.
I was born in New Jersey. And I was there. Yeah. I was
So
from
lives
here
in New
more.
York. So,
He's more
Yeah.
church to the Manhattan.
Yes. It's actually 6 hours from where I am.
Well, before I do turn it over to Tina and Melissa, a couple of things that I wanted to share with you first to help set the stage. There have been a lot of things happening behind the scenes to really narrow in on where we want to prioritize for our strategic plan. And a couple of things have happened in the last week, so I wanted to share those with you. Tonight, we want to make sure that we get all of our commitments that we have on our strategic plan in the correct location, because there was one small thing that has needed to be changed for almost a year now, and I feel better about changing it, and I'm going to show you what that is. A quick review of the lessons that were learned that I shared with you in July, and then honoring what we have recorded and worked really hard on for the actions that have been committed to in the last year. So those are the pieces that I'm going to talk about very briefly. Starting with a review of the lessons that were learned, we need to keep our plan living and not get locked into what it has to be for 5 years and possibly become stagnant or irrelevant in certain ways. We want to make sure that we're really prioritizing, because when everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. Love the head nodding with me, great. Eliminate what is complete or is now common practice. If we already have checked it off, or we know that it's something that we do on a daily basis, it's not an action that we necessarily had to keep at that point that we talked, but I shifted some things and I'll share that tonight as well. And then consider less actions, but be more explicit in the actions that we look at so that they're measurable, make them explicit. What's the what, the who, and the when? So those lessons should be a quick review for you. Here is our strategic plan. There it is right there over on the wall as well. And what I want to point your attention to is something that I've known needed to be corrected for almost a year now. And that is, if you look under the priority area 4 of safe schools and departments, you will see that our commitments don't fully match what it says in the priority area. In the priority area, and I can read better back here, it says providing inclusive, collaborative, and welcoming environments in safe buildings. But our actions for inclusivity and welcoming were put in priority area 3. So there was a disconnect there, even though they overlap. So that first commitment of ensuring that schools and departments are welcoming, friendly, and supportive spaces, I would like to shift down to so that it matches correctly with the priority 4 language of providing inclusive, collaborative, and welcoming environments. Seeing some heads nodding there too. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So now what we will have, and I will make sure.
What if we'd said no? It's a horrible choice.
I'm really glad you started on the start of this. So I will be shifting this and putting it, just bringing it down to the 4th priority. So just wanting to make you aware that we want it to be clear for everyone. And then finally, honoring the work. You know, there were over 100 actions with some of them being measurable. It was quite a demand to get that information, collect that information, provide it to you. In talking with the administrative team, they really weren't ready to let all these actions go. And so what I have done, and you have in front of you, are to keep them all. And now I'm calling them best practices. These are expected best practices. Even if we choose not to measure all 100 and whatever, the expectation is that these are the best practices that we are going to continue to honor and implement moving forward. So I've managed to cut this down to 6 pages now from what was about 12. So that's a good thing. And so I just wanted to point those things out to you tonight before Melissa and Tina get started. And also entertain any questions you have on the 3 things that I shared tonight.
So do you have to remake all the posters?
Yeah, it's all right. It's for the right, it's the right word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate your approach to your setting the example that this isn't a one and done, set in stone, never changing like strategic plan, which many of us have experienced in our worlds where you do all this work and then nothing happens with it. So I really appreciate your approach to having this be our compass. And I love the best practices approach because what you measure, you pay attention to, and if it's listed as best practice, then that's the assumption. Even if it's not measured. So I think that's a really nice way. You didn't compromise, but you organize it in a way that makes really good sense for your administrators and yourself and the board. So I just want to say thank you. Well done.
I like the best practices because it continues to recognize the work that's been done, without like having to just drop off the list.
Any other questions or comments? All right, this show is turned over to Tina and Melissa.
I'll let you kick off if I get this shared.
It's gonna be short.
Yes, we don't have to.
We need to introduce ourselves. So thank you for letting us come and join you. We're super excited about joining the partnership and working together with you around scorecards and just continuing to move forward for improvement. So we've had the honor to work with Rachel virtually. It's wonderful to meet her in person. And we've heard wonderful things about you, all of you, and how supportive you are about the work and how supportive you are of Rachel and stuff. So we're excited and honored to join you today. Down. Did I turn it off?
Yes, maybe.
Is that the red button? I don't want to push that.
All right.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't like,
Need another remote, I have one in.
Oh, I think, there we go.
Who knows? It's just a little techy.
Down,
Just that one.
this one. Okay, so we were gonna introduce ourselves, but clearly, as we did before, this is me, that is my picture of my family, just so you can see them. I'll let Melissa
Yeah.
introduce yourself.
And that's my crazy family, extended and beyond. And we were just discussing, Tina has a new puppy.
I do.
She's not quite sure why she added that to her family, but
6-month-old.
good for you.
What kind of puppy? What's
It's a
the?
Bernedoodle.
Oh my gosh, my daughter's dream dog.
Well, if you get
Not a
a part of
size,
it.
so yeah, 40 or 50 pound dog, but lots of times in between meetings, I'm like, "Come on, so excited." So we're still kind of training for that.
Oh, gosh. I was just saying, because I have a 19-year-old cat who
Yeah.
needs about as much attention, but not a puppy for sure. So, because this is our first time with you as a board, and we appreciate your investment and commitment to the partnership that we now have, we just want to share a little bit about our organization, so you have a context for that. We're a team that's existed since 2010, and we are all former educators ourselves. We work across the K-12 spectrum and into colleges and universities, primarily some regional technical institutions in the South, where our organization started. We are owned by what I call our parent company, which is Huron. We tend to call ourselves Studer Education because that's what we've been since we were founded, but we were acquired some years ago. So we have two names in case that gets confusing. But what's important is really in the third bullet there. All of the services that we provide. Luckily with you, you had done strategic planning by the time we got here. So now we're just going to focus on execution and implementation. But we also administer surveys, which is something we'll be talking with Mount Angel about. Our coaching is ongoing. I heard you mentioning some sit and get as professional development, and we would like to think that's not what we deliver. And that part of what makes our partnerships work is the ongoing commitment. So multiple years, not just, hey, we'll drop in from New York and then good luck. So that's really important to us, and really the sustainability beyond when we work with you. And so building the capacity of your leaders is the leverage point we have chosen. You can choose teachers, you can choose leaders, you can choose families. We happen to really focus primarily on the leaders in an organization, and they can be in different seats. But those who are having influence on others. So that's important to us. And then what we talk about on the next one is really systems. So thinking about your organization, this district as a system, getting to a place where leadership behaviors are consistent and reliable. And like many other communities, you've had changes in leadership, and that is, I'm sorry to say, likely to continue. That's what we see across the field. And so figuring out how to establish a system from your strategic plan that also gets folks acting and behaving in a consistent and reliable way is really the route to organizational excellence. And one of the things that we'll be excited to do here is combine a focus on the culture that you have here and what that means, like what does it feel like and sound like and look like to be part of this organization? How do you make that a positive and improvement-minded culture? But also then sort of the hard stuff of strategy and strategic execution. And so we'll blend back and forth between both of those. For example, tomorrow we're going to work on the annual plan for the strategic work you've committed to. And then we're also going to talk about expressing gratitude and how leaders can show through reward and recognition what really matters. So I think we didn't plan it that way, but it's actually a great combination of both the heart, you could say the heart and mind if you wanted to be simpler, or you could say culture and strategy if you were a consultant. But again, our leadership focus. I think we'll just pause since you already shared with us who you were. Did you have any questions about our organization? And I hope that wasn't repetitive, but I always figure with a new connection, it's helpful. We also have a growing presence in your region. So I don't know even if you know that, but I think so. So we're really interested, I think, in the coming years and thinking about how some of the districts in this area can be supportive to each other. Because you're tackling similar challenges, you're trying to implement, plans that have common high leverage moves in them. And we think that'll be a benefit as we get further into it. So that's exciting.
I'm gonna take a moment and just connect to purpose a little bit. So think of your past weekend. And think of something that happened that might have taken one small step towards a long-term goal you might have. Whether it's a year goal from now, or if you have an immediate need, maybe a small action that you did to take care or to meet that need. So give me a moment to think about that. I want to have some people share. Here.
I don't mind starting.
Yeah.
My immediate need, based on conversations that I had with our administrative team last week, was making sure that I revised this so that they knew we were still honoring the work. And that needed to be done immediately, so when they came back to work on Monday, I could give them that assurance. So that was a short-term immediate need that got met.
So impressive. Here I am thinking, I don't think I did anything strategic last week. But I might have.
Well, I'll think, so we can, I'll go towards a longer term goal. So eventually I will retire. And my husband and I don't know where we're gonna live when that happens, but we've been looking at places outside of the US. So actually, landed on an article that listed some cool spots that are potential retirement spots for us outside the US.
Yeah. Did some research.
Some research. And then I earned a blister doing immediate action. We had to replace the deck on a house we owned. I helped my husband. So that was an immediate.
Anyone else want to share?
I didn't have anything this weekend, but I mean, something that's ongoing. A little more personal, my mom had been shown signs of dementia, and I had contact, she'd been at the towers, and today was kind of the ultimate thing that happened, and then it was like, the gal was saying she really needs memory care, but what was nice is she gave me a recommendation, my sister and I went and looked at it, and it was just like perfect and everything, and so we feel like now we've got a place that she's gonna be able to go to, so.
Reassurance.
Yeah.
So my next step I took was, well, my long-term goal, as you heard, my son who will be a senior. So I want to embrace every moment I can. He's still with me as a senior. So this past weekend, he had his senior pictures. We're just living in the moment. As a boy, I'm not sure he really enjoyed it, but I did. Me. So.
Wow.
So we know that our actions is really truly the key to success. And it's all of those small steps that we can do along the way that's going to reach our long-term goal. And what's really powerful is if we do that across a whole organization, all leading in the same direction, that's when we really experience organizational excellence.
Yeah, so we're going to introduce you this evening to a concept called a scorecard and a scorecard process. I say both, and we'll define what it is, because scorecard can mean lots of things in sports or in organizations, etc. But today we'll talk through how we think it'll be the next step in organizing the strategic action of the district forward. So from here, I want to tell you where it comes from. And that is, these 9 principles undergird our work as a coaching team. and what we want to foster in the organizations we work with. Now, I don't have to adopt the 9 principles. You don't have to become us. These were developed more than a decade ago by studying high-performing organizations, schools, and other types of institutions. And so why we use these is to really be simple and clear about what matters most in a successful organization. And as we work with districts, we're pulling from the different principles depending on the need. So one of the things I would do is sort of process what we think we've learned about Mount Angel and where you might want to go next based on the principles. You're welcome to read them all. I see, Rachel, you have our latest book, Hardwiring Excellence in Education, which has a chapter for each of the 9 principles, examples of them in schools. But the organizational scorecard and process starts with that commitment to excellence, which we see you already have here. So that's not something you're coming to us for, but you started with your commitment to the 4 priorities and those commitments that will get you there. As Rachel mentioned in talking about last year and lessons learned, you had a lot of things you wanted to measure. That's not uncommon. One of the hardest things, particularly in K-12, is trying to measure the most important things because we can get awash in data. And so part of what we're going to talk about is going from the 100 actions to a small set of actions designed to impact a small set of measures. And that's not because only a small set of things matter. It's just, unless you chunk that off a little bit, you just get overwhelmed. And you'll have 3 years down the road and you won't have found yourself to make progress. I would suggest that what we're really going to be focusing on here right now with the organizational scorecard is principle 7. And that is, you developed the plan, you're coming out of the pandemic, you're moving forward, and people really need to understand, how do those 4 priorities guide our behavior? How do we get aligned to what's in that plan so that we're living what we said we would do? And it's not that people don't want to or are resistant to that. It's more, if we don't see how we connect to that larger purpose, then very often we'll make our way in what we think are great directions, but aren't necessarily aligned. The other thing is, we can't have too many actions that we're committed to, because then it will be hard to align. And by October, we'll be feeling a little like, well, that was a great idea in August, but I'm not so sure about that. We've gotten into the year. On the next slide, you'll see that this is going to be the foundation. So no change except the new commitment moving down. And what's fascinating is I don't know how I missed the operational foundation. I have been thinking about the 4 priorities and the 4 commitments, but that is really critical as well. And that'll be an important part of our discussion tomorrow. But all to say, when we reorganize, which is what I will be calling it in this scorecard, we're still aligned to the 4 priorities. The commitments are still going to be key to what you do. But in this version, what we'll try, sorry, that's okay, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm done. Is to move in this direction. I'll let you talk about that.
So when thinking about building a house, just as a metaphor, the thing that we do first, right, is build that solid foundation. Then we build the walls on top of it, which they all need to be straight and aligned, which then, if we want a second story, supports that second story going on, which then supports that roof and creates the full house. This is very similar to a scorecard. So in a scorecard, we're really setting the fences around, and we're all aligning towards our priority, which is the foundation. We have 4 priorities in our mission and our vision, which is the foundation of everything we do. And then we're going to set up those walls, those fences, so that all of our actions inside are aimed towards those priorities. And so it's building a little bit of freedom within those fences, but yet making sure that all of our actions are very intentional, because this is another way of cascading all of our actions or our scorecard. As you can see at the top are the big aims or our priorities. We already have that set. Next is our mission and vision. You already have that set as well. on your posters, we're really gonna be honing into that district, that yellow rectangle box where we're developing our district scorecard. So we're gonna be working together with all of you and with our administrative team, and building annual goals, which are going to help lead to those priorities, and then selecting what are some intentional strategic actions that we can do and how will we measure those along the way in short cycles. Eventually, this is a 5 to 7 year process. This will not occur all this year, just so you know. But eventually, just like a house, you build that foundation, you did your priorities, then you built the walls, right? And then they'll build the top, the second story, and then the roof. Similar to that, once we do the district scorecard, and we practice using the district scorecard and measuring it and analyzing, monitoring it along the way, we will then cascade it down to the departments, where our department leads will build a scorecard that aligns with the district, that aligns with our priorities, which then will cascade down to the schools, to the classrooms, and then to the individual students, where all of our actions are leading in the same direction towards the strategic or the annual or the priorities. So why do we use a scorecard? A scorecard is a tool. That's simply what it is. It's an improvement tool. And it truly tells us and defines what success looks like. It has those specific annual goals. We then also prioritize our actions, so we're all heading in the same way, and we monitor that scorecard along the way, knowing that with those short cycle measures, we are able to make adjustments to our actions if we're finding that it's not helping us attain that goal. So
If I can pause, how does this sound like something you've done before? Or something you've tried in another setting? Do you have some comparisons? Just, well, as we've talked about it.
Similar but different.
Yeah, in what way?
ISO 9001, it's a scorecard system. that
Yes.
is running through processes and what your process is and how it aligns with requirements.
You're right. Spot on. You know more about that stuff than I do. Great. So that, and is that an industrial setting? Did you have one, Irene? I thought it sounded.
I did a similar thing in the school district, right?
Yeah, good. Yeah, we like to say our ideas aren't new. They're just often tweaks on something to help make it more productive. So we're not gonna claim originating an organizational scorecard. Rather, it's really in how that can be in the work.
we also talked about that Pareto effect, how, like we've all been hearing, if we do a whole lot of things and don't narrow that focus, we're not gonna get anywhere, right? Nothing will be done. So we're here today, as you heard from Rachel and Melissa, to really narrow that focus. We know for any administrator, any staff member, any person, 80% of our day is truly in those daily routine tasks, whether it's attending our meetings, being visible across the school, having announcements, things like that. It's those daily tasks that keep us afloat, right? And keep those daily actions continuing to move along. That leaves about 20% of our day. And so we want to be truly, truly intentional with what actions we do in those 20% of our day so that it has the most impact on student success and student outcomes. Because that 20% is what creates that large increase. Oh.
Keep going. It's animated.
Oh,
Look at that.
I'm like, similar to that, like I said, that 80% just keeps that boat afloat. And then with that continuous improvement, where you are constantly coming back and analyzing it, that's what moves it towards your priorities. I clearly didn't do a PowerPoint up there. Wow, that looks different.
It's very cool. So as we've talked about, I won't go too far, because I think you're here, we want to get into what we're modeling for you. And then we're going to get your feedback about what has started. But first step, defining success. Now, what that means is within your 4 priorities and amidst your commitments, what are the specific things you want to improve in 23-24? So while there are many things you could improve, where is your attention focused? Then we'll talk through with the group tomorrow, so which actions, and that list of best practices is like the menu, right? So these are the things we've committed to, and some of them are already established, and so they don't have to be an improvement action, they're just how we operate. But some of them, there might be room for growth, and so we'll align those. And then where we'll finish up tonight is in talking with all of you as board members about how Rachel can lead a regular assessment of progress and report out. So thinking about a fall report out, a midwinter report out, an end of year report out, that allows board members and the community to understand, here's what we committed to in August. Here's where we are, here's where we've been able to take actions and achieve impact to some degree. We're sort of predicting how we might do by the end of the year. Then we go back into the work, maybe we change something because what we see is it's not working as we anticipated. We keep working, we come back out, monitor, assess, adjust. So that you're not, as some people like to say, setting the goal in August and hoping that in June it's achieved. But you're checking in as you go along the way. And then what the scorecard and the scorecard process allows is the efficient communication of those priorities to lots of people. So sometimes in a list like the best practices document, that's a super document for leaders, for some of you on the board. You're like, okay, I know what all of these things are. That would be very intimidating to your average parent, perhaps. It's in educational language, it's not accessible. And so when we think about the scorecard and the format you see in a few slides, part of what we're trying to do is be able to say, this is where we're focused and why and what we're going to do about it to a broader range of people, which also include teachers and custodians and all the other people that help make the district work. So that's the process we're heading in. So last year, your process and your document, this is just a little snippet of one of your quarterly reports. You had for each priority and commitment, you had measurement points, you had goals and actions. We are still going to have measurement, goals, and actions. And then we'll talk about that reporting on a cadence as well. What I would point out is there was a lot in this last year, and I only say that out loud because Rachel has said that as well. I'm not, everybody does it. We want everything to be better. But there's a lot in there. And one particular thing I think might have been sort of challenging is goals and actions are together. And what happens when we put those together, which is a great place to start. I mean, the content of this document is spot on. It's going to be what you have in front of you as best practices. It's what we're going to pull from. But in some ways, mixing what we're trying to achieve with how we're trying to get there gets a little confusing. And sometimes people think, well, I just did the thing, so that must mean we achieved the goal. Not always, not always. So when we think about this new format, which we're introducing to you, it will have the priority areas, it will have the goals. Yeah, let's look at it that way. Yeah, this is nice. So it's just a slightly different format, so I'm hoping we can make the connections. So on this document across the top will be your 4 priorities, totally familiar. They each have descriptors, which are on this poster and will go in there. And then in a vertical way, so for academic excellence, the team will select a small set of goals in academic excellence that we're focused on in 23-24. Won't be everything. It won't be all of the measurement points that were in there last year. It will be what of these are most urgent and which do we need? I think if you hit the animation, something will happen that will help me. Yes, it'll be those annual results, those end of year kind of lagging measures that will tell you, did we have a successful year? Did we make the move we wanted to? And typically, and we're going to get your input on these tonight, we want to sort of lock those down. We want to make a commitment now. These are the ones we're trying to influence. Then for those goals and measures, we'll define, okay, well, that's great. We'll know where we are in June, but what are we going to look at along the way to see if we're making progress? Sometimes it's the same thing. If attendance is a focus, we can pull an attendance report as often as we want to and know if we're trending in the right direction. But if we're looking at, let's say, student proficiency in English language arts, we don't take the same test throughout the year that we take at the end of the year. So we have to figure out how are we gonna predict how that's going? And things that will help us change if we need to. So that is actually the hardest part of this work, is those predictive measures and getting them right. The actions are really what they say. It's within the commitments that you have in your strategic plan. What part of that are we doing this year? And we'll set those kind of broadly for the district. So there's room, as Tina said before, that it might look this way at the elementary school, but this way at the middle school. And they're not going to be exactly the same. I did middle school, you did elementary. Our students were not the same, to say the least. And so we want something broad enough to be inclusive of your 3 schools, but also attentive to, yes, there's going to be some variation depending on where the school or the department or the whatever part of the organization. And the strategic actions are not locked down. So we will work with the team tomorrow to develop those. And then after you do your first monitoring, we may say, wow, that's not really giving us the bang we expected, or goodness, this other thing changed. And so probably what we thought was going to be the most important thing to do might be something different. And that would be part of that reporting out to you and to others, so that people aren't confused. Well, why did we stop doing that? Because, you know, that's half the battle, is nobody knows what we stopped doing. So that'll be part of that reporting out and that decision-making, which can sometimes be hard. Sometimes in October, you're not sure if something is working yet. So there'll be lots of those conversations about how long do we give something before we realize, you know what, that might not have been the solution that we thought it was. And many of the challenges facing schools today, it's interesting, I was with another district who's really trying to improve the student experience. And they said, well, Melissa, who's doing it really well? Like, who's got a great solution for this? And I said, I go to every district and they're saying, we want students more engaged in school. We want to see them. Like, if somebody had the answers, I would just tell you. But many of the things we're trying to do, particularly in the environment we're in, are hard. No one has, oh yes, just do X and it'll work. So I'll just pause there and see. So across these 4, you'll see these 3 places. And part of what's hardest is we will limit the team. 2 to 3, maybe 4 measures in each of those priority areas. No more progress monitoring measures than you have annual goals, because you can't look at 17 pieces of data and make sense of it. And then in actions, 3 to 5 as well. So it should, and this is the hardest part of it, narrow to what are we focused on this year. And as you mentioned earlier, that makes this living. This is the version for the beginning of 23-24, and it's just going to keep going. Okay, I think then that here is the beginning of your scorecard with some initial thoughts and hard work. I shouldn't say initial thoughts. It was hard work on the part of the admin
Days
team.
of hard work.
Days of hard work
Yes.
facilitated by you, which is very powerful. So across your, and we're going to talk about what's in there, but this one mainly is to show you the alignment. So within each of those 4, Rachel, and you can see the work here. They started with all the things they could measure, and then they thought about what's highest priority. And quite frankly, because we're in August, what are we really going to be focused on this year? And some things you've already invested. You know you're paying for them. So let's make sure they're aligned. And so they went through the activity of thinking of all the things you could measure, and then trying to refine that to those that are most urgent and that we're committed to seeing improvement on.
May I interject?
Please.
Very.
Yes, I was going to ask you.
You'll see some new things on there. And that is because this is a living document and process. We wanted to pose the question and work through the question. What are some very urgent things that were never captured in the first round of the process? And that's why there are new things up there.
And I have a really important question. Who was the scribe that
It was not me.
Rachel, I just.
Is that you?
Day, and
Yeah.
it's just beautiful, like, anyway, I'm just so.
Former
impressed, 'cause
first grade teacher.
Cause my writing is big, small, anyway, well, thanks.
It is.
I can read it very clearly. So.
Yeah. Well, I just like that you have the in process and then this is our, I think I would call this today's draft. And part of what we wanted to do was pause here for your input. And we can look priority by priority. And Rachel, you can add maybe some color around why these, you know, what led the team to, in the area of academic excellence, saying this year, our key outcomes are early literacy, math, language acquisition, and then proficiency. And those are English language arts, those last two.
Language acquisition, our second language learners.
Second language learners, and then the proficiency of second language learners? or-
Yes.
Okay, so real focus on those students coming to learn English.
And can you, well,
Do you want me
can you
to-
talk a little bit deeper about, it says 8th grade math, but then it says all math.
Well, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone around the table that all grade levels need time and attention and strategy around math and improvement in math. So 8th grade math is a milestone that is a strong predictor of graduation rates. But we also acknowledge that all of our math needs an overhaul and additional support. So that was the math piece. As far as early literacy, the reason we chose that is because we are seeing year after year that by high school, we actually have some of the higher rates for English language arts on SBAC around the state. It's our younger students and trying to get them ready for 3rd through 5th grade testing where they really need that support. I'll share the data with you sometime. It's a pretty good feeling when you look at what's happening at the high school, the results of the state assessments and see that we're doing so well. Last year, I believe our 11th graders, 81% of them. I mean, it was high. I know it's quite different from grade school and middle school. And then we also chose language acquisition or recommending that because there's a reason we're getting House Bill 3499 money, and that's because our second language learners at the secondary level are not performing at the progressions that we want to see. So those were what we found to be most urgent.
Which of those four speak to all of you? Four-ish. You see, she snuck a couple measures in, a single bullet, and I didn't get past me. But which of those seem of concern and value for those of you here?
I think they're all valuable. Especially like early literacy, right, what I say about the benchmark at 3rd grade graders. And looking at where our current 2nd grade, where going to be 3rd graders are. And then, like you said, the math scores across the board. Which I shared with Rachel, it's interesting that math is lower than like reading or writing, because math is black and white, right? The answer is either right or wrong.
It's a different language though for them. It's. You know, it's like.
It's hard to sell teachers, so.
I was surprised, and I'm a big advocate for language acquisition. Because if you're looking at it through, are you looking at through English language learners?
Yes,
Okay, and you're looking at through K-12,
yes.
okay, then I'm good with that.
What do you
Because
think?
I was, what?
What were you thinking?
Well, no, because we've never dealt with English language, and I'm very happy that we are. But when I originally heard about the high school, I thought, well, it's words in elementary, you know, it's those kids from K all the way through 12, and we don't have a system of any kind, that I am aware of with that.
We do, but it could be much more effective.
It is much more.
Certainly, if we're seeing the results in secondary that are not
Yes.
what we want, there's a foundation that is missing or
Exactly.
not strong in
Exactly.
elementary, so definitely K-12.
How does our big bubble of newcomers taint that just a little bit?
You know what, right now it doesn't, because our newcomers are not required to test for the first year that they're in the country.
Interesting.
in Oregon.
Yeah. But I would say that longer term, if what you are starting to see are students arriving at different ages,
Right.
then part of what you're saying is your system has to be able to support a 15-year-old who's in their second year of English language learning and a 4-year-old. And
Exactly.
there are likely different, in some ways, if that's increasing in your
Or a
community.
15-year-old that's never had any formal education
Correct.
versus a 15-year-old that doesn't speak the language, but has had all its education in another language, yeah, so.
And that's where sometimes the math becomes so challenging.
Exactly.
Because, to your point earlier, not only is it a new language, but it's one you haven't been exposed to initially for students interacting.
I've always thought math is in some way because it's numbers and symbols that are the same. I mean, I know it is a new kind of language, but also because I've had experience with, students that have just, newcomers that have come both with or without the education, but those that had the education, the math to them was the easiest one to grasp onto because they knew what the numbers were, they knew the symbols and that sort of thing, rather than the language which confused them a little bit more.
But I think math has changed in the US and the Common Core standards, which require you to have language proficiency to be able to do mathematics. So it's not only that you know the numbers, but you have to have all that other stuff that goes along with it. And that's where you get into that language,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And-
true.
Just to make sure that you're real clear on testing expectations for those who are multilingual or becoming multilingual. The English Smarter Balanced, they have a year. They still have to take other tests in science and math in their native language,
Right.
the first year of her writing. So that first column is specific to English proficiency, not to math.
Okay.
But then we do have some duality there because there's also.
What's missing from that first column? Was there anything you're wondering about? Well, why don't we have? And you could look at the measurement points in the best practices actually.
I was wondering why, since we've only done 1 year of PLCs. And I was wondering, well, it was a good start, and it's best practice to do PLCs, but is everybody on board and really doing PLCs? And that's the question that I had about, since it was a new initiative. And it takes a while to, maybe in elementary it was okay, I don't know if high school or middle school, maybe it's just going great, but it's like. Yeah, I did it for a year as a teacher and now I don't have to really, maybe that is the practice that's already there and I'm just reading it wrong.
I was just gonna say, what I think you're spot on, a year in, we're not done.
No, we just
It's a whole
started, we
change
just started.
in mindset. So where we would see the professional learning community
Uh-huh.
language going is in the strategic action.
Oh, okay, I
So
got that.
what we'll do tomorrow, and that's where that becomes a great menu, is say, okay, if we're really gonna do this, we're really gonna move to faster language acquisition and better math scores. The research tells us it's those
Yeah, do-
professional learning
yeah,
communities
do
that allow
PLCs.
that to happen.
Okay, that makes sense, I got it.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
and part of, so the key though as we work with the team is gonna be, what's the next chunk? Because when you implement something like PLCs, that's multi-year.
Absolutely.
And there probably is some variation, building to building, how that was adopted and all that sort of thing. So part of it will be, what's our expectation by the end of next year for that practice? So I think you'll see it as we fill that in. Would you have answered that differently? I'm sorry.
No.
And I think you kind of said that when you said that practice of PLCs. It's kind of like the action.
Yeah, it's a
It's what you do,
practice of
action
PLCs, okay, so I
PLCs.
understand now,
Mhm, because
okay.
PLCs isn't a measurement.
It's not a measurement, it's an
Right.
act, it's an action, okay.
Yeah.
Any others? Irene broke the ice on whether you want to ask for anything else.
Somebody else.
And here's the thing, we don't need any more, because if you want another one on there, I'm gonna make Rachel take off one that's on there. So,
Will too.
And Rachel worked really hard town, it kind of.
Squeeze some of those into one.
Yeah.
But I think there's a challenge.
Yeah.
Because there is a sense of urgency about every
Everything.
single one of those
Yeah.
things, and I kept pushing and saying, no, the most urgent. You have to, and you only get to put 3 check marks and that's it. So,
Well, and what they did wisely is these are again, back to the house. These are the foundational ones. You can't worry about grad rate if you don't have early literacy. I mean, yeah, you can pretend, okay, we're gonna fix it all in 11th and 12th grade. So I think what you did nicely was look for early intervention and then some of that K-12 span with math and the language acquisitions, which many of those other things will improve if you get this right. And eventually, then, yeah, you do move on up to, okay, what are we doing for credit attainment or those kinds of things. Okay, so then in thriving students, there are 3 items. Participation activities in sports, the student belonging survey, so that's student perception of how they belong, and their attendance. Commentary on why, or what do you think?
twofold on the first one, we know that that's been very important to the board for a number of years, but it's also important to all of us who are leading, because we know that there's a connection between student participation and student belonging. And we know when there's a connection between student belonging and meeting those needs of Maslow, then there's a more increased likelihood of achievement. So they're connected. And attendance is something that we have been concerned about. We need to get students here so that they can learn.
Similarly, or I didn't realize the first one was one that the board has been interested in as well, but you're right for the connection.
Maybe I missed.
Don't.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Those are
Thinking of what was presented to us last year when we were going over at the beginning, these probably would be 3 of my top priorities, what I think, yes, these are the things that are gonna help students to be successful.
They'll thrive, yeah. Well, and attendance is a great example. Everybody's struggling with attendance. If you can get back to somewhere near where we used to be or where we should be, whatever that means, that could come off in a year.
Yeah.
And then you can go on to something else, and so I think, again, these are pretty foundational. And they're different enough, but connected enough that you might not have to have a ton of different actions, because if I feel I belong, I'll show up and I might participate in things that are not just academic. So whatever you're doing to enhance that sense of belonging could actually impact more than one of those measures. Anything missing? So then priority 3, engaging family and community partnerships. It's fascinating. Inclusive events, I think you can talk more about that, but 2-way communication is giant. And we were just talking, I was in a meeting earlier today, we do parent caregiver surveys and we in fact do them here in Mount Angel, and the expectation for 2-way communication has only heightened in recent years. So I think to me, that's another foundational thing that we weren't always doing in our field. And I think the expectation has increased, at least we're seeing in some places.
Can you explain
Yeah.
what you mean by 2-way?
Yes, absolutely. I think, I know we pride ourselves on reaching out to families and especially to our Spanish speaking families. And then we mark a check saying we've done that. But what we need to do a better job of is actually listening and responding by changing some of our practices. So that we need to take the next step. It could be 2-way communication is that we need to go to an apartment complex instead of sending out a Google survey that many of our families have a hard time reading, even in a native language. So we want to make sure that we're listening and holding ourselves accountable and that we're responding to what we're hearing. Does that make sense? And then inclusive events, that really falls under both priorities 3 and 4, but what we really meant by inclusive events was that they are culturally relevant and appropriate and celebrating and acknowledging all of Mount Angel, not part of Mount Angel, and making sure that all 3 of our schools are celebrating that rather than just 1 or 2 schools.
Does that ring true for all of you? And again, taking steps, so from where you are now to something more, I should have mentioned earlier, what you have right now are bullets. The next time you see this, each of those bullets will say something like, increase the number of culturally relevant events from 0 to 7. I'll just make that up. So every bullet will have what we call sort of SMART goal. And some of them are gonna be hard, so we'll start with whatever we can count. Some are easier with assessments or counts of students participating, that kind of, although even that one's hard because the tracking of student participation is often just a pain. We don't, it's not easy in our systems, it's not automatic, there are things kids do, do they count, do they not count? So anyway, all to say, if it seems broad right now, that it is, and it will get more specific. And then the last one, which now that we have moved the commitment to priority 4, we have the action aligned to welcoming practices for students and families. And then the other measure coming from the parent survey, or asking parents their perception, and in fact, items that are included in that are, my child's school is, I believe my child's school is a safe environment for learning. My family is treated with respect at the school. So it does link pretty closely to after we maybe count or somehow assess, are we practicing things that welcome people in? Then is it having the impact we want? And they're saying, yes, I feel respected or safe.
I think one other thing that we had talked about adding was the employee survey.
Yes.
And that would go in that priority 4 as well, about that collaborative and welcoming environment for our staff as well. So it's for our families and our students, but also our staff, so they can assist.
I think it's in there. I saw it in one place and not another, but any other?
It's gonna be a stretch. The challenge for us is making that first bullet, welcoming practices for students and families measurable. So we're gonna work hard on that next time.
Ready.
So some thoughts that are part of the best practices. The administrative team is extremely committed to having welcoming audits and making sure that we have teams of parents and students and staff who go to each school, look at the signage, read the walls, have a conversation with the office staff, so that it's just a second way of measuring how parent perspective and staff and student perspective can be gained. It's also a really beautiful example of two-way communication.
Because you'll have parents saying, I didn't find that helpful. I was just in a school recently that had been recently built, and the front area of the school where you walk in, actually in big letters, like yours says John Kennedy High School, said, welcome. And I thought, I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but very often people aren't sure where to enter our buildings simply because the signage has the name or whatever the case may be. And I thought, well, that seems so simple. And yet it does direct you, like that's where you would go, especially as we're safety conscious about where you enter the building, I think. And I haven't visited your school, so they may have wonderful signage. I was just thinking. Okay, let's move on. And I think there are a couple extra slides in here. Maybe I'll just, this is what we just talked about. Okay. That's all right. So here's what we're thinking for monitoring progress and adjusting. Thank you. You don't like this remote anyway, I can tell. No, I know. And it was cheap, I really know now. My colleagues would appreciate it. So we just started our work with Rachel this summer. And we've been going back and forth on, is this the right format? Should it be another format? How do you go from all of the
honored activities you've committed to what's really most important. And so that's where we've been. Today with you and your input as we've just had and with the team tomorrow, we're going to take those areas and set goals. Where there isn't baseline data, we might have for this year a set baseline, just so you know. I don't know if you've surveyed parents in the way that this survey will do, so we might have a starting point in 23, 24. Define those actions and the progress monitoring that we'll use throughout the year. So that's what the team's work is tomorrow. And that will allow, once that draft is pulled together and maybe refined a little bit with the most senior leaders, that will allow the communication at the start of the school year. Here's what we're about this year, folks. Here's where our focus is. And I think that will help, back to Principle 7, people say, oh yeah, I see myself in that. Oh, here's where I contribute, which is really critical. What we're recommending, and we'll talk more about, is that there are 2 times, October maybe, February maybe, that's up to the superintendent's commitment to you. But as coaches, we would come be part of that process with the admin team to pause and check on, are we doing the actions we said we would do? And are they having the impact? Or can we not tell you? And then that will produce an evening for you or a part of your regular meeting where you're hearing that update. And you can understand, oh, well, we're gonna adjust here and here's why, or we're gonna continue on. So it can sometimes depend a little bit on when good measures come in. So that's what we'll be talking about, but you would anticipate that at least twice a year. And then at the end of the year, and again, a little bit anticipating when your final measures come in, so it might not be June. I'm not as familiar with Oregon yet, so I don't get all that good stuff. But you do have then, it's a cycle. So you close it out and say, here's what we accomplished, here's what we didn't. And really refresh it, which means, as I said, and as you did this year, if something was completed, let's take it off. If we've achieved a target and we want to move on to something else, then let's change it. And so you'd see a conversation like this again. The difference this year to come, I would suggest, is that we'll be having this conversation we're having in August in the spring. So even before you end the year, because you budget in the winter and spring. And so that's when you should really be talking about, well, what are we going to focus on next year? And you probably naturally do, but let's use that to start developing that next scorecard. And some things will just stay continuous because you won't get to the end in 1 year. But having that conversation earlier, so your budgetary investments align, and you're gearing up for summer professional development or whatever else needs to happen so that that's in line, and then you're rolling into the action. And you take those final results as okay, do we need to tweak something? Is there a shock in here? That means what we thought we should do, maybe we need to shift. And again, you would be part of that refresh. I know you received some reporting last year and even this summer, as you remember, as you did in July. How does that feel for a cadence as a board member of understanding, here's how we're doing on that strategic plan? And then via you to the community, because it will give you some answers when somebody's like, what are they doing about blah, 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 blah. Maybe nobody talks like that. You would have updated information on those occasions. Well, I just learned, here's what's happening around these very narrow focuses. Doesn't mean you won't get lots of other reports throughout the year as they are coming, but how does that feel for cadence? Sherry, you look like you're okay with it. Mark? Okay. Excellent. Thank you. All right. Well, that's what we had to talk about. And Tina, I'll let you share that and then we can answer any questions.
So there was a Gallup poll that 67% of the people that were surveyed said that they didn't know what was expected of them at work. So the scorecard is truly a tool that helps us define what success is. As you heard and as you saw, we're going to have those annual goals and it's going to define what success looks like. And so everybody will know what's expected, and also writing down those strategic actions. We know where we're going to spend our time and where we're going to put that 20%. of our intentional time towards. So that way we can make it organizational excellence Carson's priority levels. So what questions do you have for us, just with the whole process?
The question that I have, this is wonderful. So the people that originally helped create the strategic plan, how did they get informed on? You know, I worked really hard on doing the strategic plan. You know, the groups that were there and they had that blood, sweat and tears and commitment, and now how do they fold back in so they continue to be in the fold with what's going on and how it's revised or, yeah.
I'm really pleased that you asked that, because I've been doing a lot of processing about that since becoming involved with Studer. And one of the questions that was not asked of all stakeholders, that looking back now, I wish had been asked, is what did they feel was urgent for our district? That's why so many of these things never showed up, but all the other things did. So I think that there's something to that I need to continue to think about messaging. We acknowledge all of that great input, and it lives here in their best practices. And we also want to acknowledge that we need to be looking at what is most urgent for our children. So I'm working on it. Okay.
One of the things, just for you to add to your thinking, we have seen people take the original group or whomever was part of that and bring them back up to twice a year. Once when the scorecard is developed, or even while it's in development, to say what we're just saying to you. Here's where we think our focus is gonna be next year, here's why. Can we have some of that input around our judgment here? And then maybe around that February date to say, here's our progress. And so people who have committed on the front end can see that continuing. So that's an option.
That's a great
I
idea.
like that.
That's a great idea simply because you have a group of forward thinkers that help create that.
Ah,
And so what you want to do is keep that group of forward thinkers in your midst to continue with in different schools spreading the word out in essence and being the tellers of the story.
sometimes over time, you even can organize them in teams by priority, so I don't know how big the group was or how many people you've been talking about, but.
About 20 to 25.
Okay, I think then as a single group, that would be.
They worked hard at it.
Yeah.
It was a process.
And then, yes, they're committed. Yeah.
And the neat thing is if we wait till the scorecard is done, they're gonna see some of the
Exactly.
dreams that are connected, some of those things that are in here that are down as the actions. But I love the idea of allowing them to have some voice.
Right.
It's fun.
I think one thing I'm a little cautious of is with the scorecard.
Yeah.
We are pairing off the priority chunks. We need to keep the message of, it's all still there.
That's a good
I
point.
think that's one thing I haven't heard tonight, it's all still here, we've done a lot of it, we have a lot more to go. We're kind of clipping off the most important pieces that we see for next year, 2 years. But everything else is still there and it's still on our radar. And I think that's what the message also needs to include is how we haven't lost any of that, we're just putting some of the things to the top of the list for next year. So.
Span comment on that?
Yeah.
Because I cut someone.
No, I was gonna say that would help with getting that team back together and, saying, this is all still here, but this is what we're doing,
And even just, we really advertise this to the community when we first put it out there. Just so that the message is, we're continuing to work on it, here's the most important things. Here's the things we will need to work on. I just don't want to lose that thoughts of those people who are just thinking, well, what about everything else? Because we're gonna get that. We will,
Yes.
even from staff, it's gonna.
Oh,
how about
yeah,
everything
well,
else?
my favorite's not on there. That's what somebody's gonna say.
I mean, you don't care about your.
Oh.
That's
My favorite's
why it's not on there.
It's not on there.
No, yeah, no, it's just.
may hear that from somebody.
Of
You're
course.
absolutely right, Mark, 100%.
To Mark's point, the only way that we have publicly shown the updates to all of this has been through board meetings. One of the things I love and am excited about is that we're going to find a way to make the scorecard live for people now. It's not just gonna be in the boardroom. And so that's something that really excites me, is finding a way that it's reader friendly. So that anybody can read it and go, oh, I didn't know that. So, and of course, all of those commitments still stay as well. But the actual actions and measurements is not a document that we make public. So we're coming out, we're making it public. Let's do this.
A lot of districts will have it on the website, so you see it, the beginning one, and then as you report. I think the other thing to think about, Mark, and all of you, because you'll have to message this, right? I mean,
Right.
Rachel will probably send a strong message, and then you'll get the questions and the potentially complaints or whatever. The other thing I tend to think of is, think of the scorecard as this year's cover page for the larger plan. The larger plan is still there. We just have to pull, it's almost like we have a magnifying glass for 1 year, and we've pulled it into this smaller document. And so sometimes I talk about it that way, that allows people to see. And some people will have their feelings hurt. I think we should just acknowledge that there are things on there that.
Yeah.
That, and we don't want to be disrespectful, and that will be the case. And some of them can't be on the scorecard yet till we get some of the things done.
Absolutely.
And I like your the magnifying glass
Yes.
piece of it, because that's what we really are doing. We're putting those important things at the top for this year. And keeping everything else rolling kind of with it, because like you just said, some of those things this year will affect things that we haven't started in or that are in process that we have to continue to improve or change.
Absolutely.
And I'm not seeing anything in the scorecard draft that is not supporting all of these commitments.
Yes.
Like, because everybody
Oh, I
who was, you know,
Absolutely.
part of the building of where we landed, they'll see that we're not abandoning.
Yeah, and that's kind of what that's my fear, but I know we're not, but I think that could be the perception.
Yes.
And in some ways, you might need a couple of years before you diminish that perception for some people, like they won't believe you
That's right.
until
It
they
takes-
see that next year
it
is a
takes
little
a while.
different than this year.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's important to have that committee refocus, you know, I don't know if it's annually or whatever, that group that kind of did that. So you're still nurturing that group of goers, and then in time you add some others that may be part of it as you're expanding that, you know, that group, because you need to have, it's not only the board or the administrators, it's like the key players in the district are equally as important.
For sure, and that the strategic plan steering committee
Exactly.
was business owners,
Right.
community members, parents, community members that don't have kids in the schools, staff. I mean, it was highly representative of the community, and we want to keep that intact.
Exactly, yes, yes.
And from the industrial perspective, it's because it's very similar to what we're doing. We didn't get a pick and choose. All 29 of them had to be done. We didn't get a priority or anything, so. If someone out there in the world is thinking in that same realm, it's like, well,
Why can't you?
why are they just picking these? What happened to all the rest of them? So again, it's the perception,
Yeah.
the message that we get.
Yeah.
These questions are good for our next thinking. I mean, I think that's really helpful to be readying for what is the not happy response gonna be. Because some people are gonna be like, oh, sweet, it's this nice tight list of
Right.
things that
Well,
we're focused on.
Also, there's the danger of the ancillary people in a district that are, you know, well, I guess you're just doing reading and math. I don't have anything going on for me, you know, so I don't have to worry about that. So you know, which is absolutely wrong, but you have to remember that there are those pieces that are you know, how do I fit into the system? I'm not a math teacher, I'm not a reading teacher, I am a teacher and now what? You know, so there is that piece
That
that
will
has
happen, too. I'm fascinated and I'll be excited to work with some of the department leaders tomorrow. I think your thriving students priority,
That's,
that sense of student, every single person here has a role to play.
That's right.
And
that's
really-
the column that I think you can really.
That's the piece that you have
Yeah.
to write.
So I think, but you're right, if I was a social studies teacher, I'm never in the academic excellence priority, you know, but I'm like, if kids can't read, we're not doing it.
I know, yeah, totally.
It never bothered me, but I do think, I'm
Right.
married to an art teacher, so same thing, you know, I'm never on the scorecard. You know what? Everything you do can make a difference, and I think part of this is how it is communicated and how people help folks see. Because we want everyone to see themselves in there. That's part of the purpose, is connecting them to this plan through it, so.
I think it's also fair to say, important to message. The reason these are staying on here as best practices is because they're best practices. And we're expecting best practices. And we can still get data on these things, just because it's not on the scorecard,
Right.
doesn't mean we're not looking at it, right? Like grad rates or looking at data on grading, those kinds of things, still floating out there, it's not going away, so.
And the priorities we chose are gonna affect all those other things too.
And I was also just gonna mention with the safe schools and departments and the welcoming environment. You know, we've got construction happening with the bond, and so it's really the alignment of keeping everything in that direction. We don't have a lot of discretionary money to spend on the maybe pretty stuff, and yet that, you know, welcoming environment, the signage, that type of thing can all maybe, you know, align with how we.
A smile does not cost any money.
Well, and
You know.
and
Sure is
and
right.
Redmond-
And has a ripple effect.
Yeah, you talked about signage in Redmond, when I go to the Bible tournament there at their newer high school, their signage has smiley faces and arrows, and it's so simple, you know
Yeah.
exactly where to go, and I
I
think,
know.
oh my gosh, that signage is so welcoming and cute, and it makes me smile every time I see it.
In Redmond, so I'm gonna tell the coach that you were very pleased with the signage.
Oh, it's wonderful, that's good to know.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your time and your energy. Thanks for surfacing some things we don't wanna miss.
Good going. Nice.
We, well,
Couple of things that I.
yeah, please, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that I'm capturing how you're feeling about this. You're good with what
Yes.
we have selected. Okay,
My
great.
son is
All right, excellent. So I wanted that reassurance from you that you have confidence we're headed down the right path.
Yes.
The other things I wanted you to know is that I had ordered copies of Hardwired Excellence in Education for all of you. If you wanted to take a copy tonight, unfortunately, I picked the wrong address and they didn't show up here today. They showed up somewhere else. So if you want a copy, you will have it at our next board meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, by the way, it's big font, so it's. My reading glasses.
Wow, I can let her know. I didn't realize
It's
that.
larger font and it's an easy read.
Okay.
And also, I just want to say, if you're intrigued with the 9 principles, this is a great place to start. This is by Quint Studer. And it's also an easy read, and his work began in the medical field. And so much of it is so transferable and relevant, and also a really great read. And then the last thing I wanted you to know is that this past spring, we got into this because we went to Destination High Performance in Estacada, and it blew our minds in the best way possible. And I learned this morning that Estacada will be doing that again next.
Oh, really?
And so that is really exciting. And so in terms of your participation, 2 things. 1, please consider coming with me to Destination High Performance. next April. But also, Superintendent Ryan Carpenter offers monthly walkthroughs of classrooms. And any of you are invited to come with me to participate in that. It's very powerful. It's not a dog and pony show. It's the good, the bad, and the needs some support, but you see it is authentic and you see how it's really impacting kids. So if you want more information on that, I'll make that available to you.
Be great.
I love that. I would love to see that.
I would too.
It's been a while since I've been in this.
I had 2.5 days last spring.
You're still recovering.
I know, I have so much going on, I can't sub as much as I did when I retired.
All right, well, thanks, Melissa and Tina.
Thank
Anybody have
you.
anything else?
Yeah.
All right. We'll adjourn.
Good, thank you.
Thank you both very much.
Really nice, really good.